everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cooking with Colbath. My name is Julie Colbath, and I am the coordinator of Civic Engagement in the Office of Student Life. Thanks for tuning in. This is our 10th episode, which is so crazy and also pretty exciting. Today we're going to be doing something simple, so I don't have a lot of time on my hands this week, and so I wanted to make something quick. So the recipe that I've posted is for a chicken and broccoli shells and cheese, so basically mac and cheese. I haven't tried this recipe before, but it had like very simple ingredients, which I can appreciate, right? And if you're looking for something that's not the store-bought mac and cheese, which, I mean, I love it, but sometimes it's nice if you don't have a box on hand or to make something when you know that you know everything that's going in it. So I'm going to make mine without chicken today. I'm just not feeling the chicken, but please feel free to add it in if you would like. You could also, if you're vegetarian, right, like omit the chicken like I am. You could add more broccoli. You could add a different vegetable. I think peas would be really good in here. So choose your own adventure. But we will be using half of a box of shells. I feel like shells are nice because they like can hold the cheesy goodness. But you could also easily use like rotini noodles, elbow macaroni, any kind of noodle you want. I don't think this would be super great with spaghetti or linguine, but I think you could. I just don't always have those on hand. So we'll be using half of a box of pasta, 3 cups of broccoli, which I am chopping behind me. I started chopping some of it because we've already kind of gone over broccoli, which made me realize that I eat broccoli a lot. It's one of my favorite vegetables, so it's not a surprise. We're going to be using 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter. We're going to use a 1/4 cup of flour. We're going to use a cup of milk, a cup of chicken broth, but you could use veggie broth, beef broth. We're going to use some of my staple spices, so they kind of all mixed together, salt, pepper, and garlic. And then we will be using 2 cups of sharp cheddar cheese. So I think this recipe will be pretty quick, which I, again, am really excited about because I don't have a lot of time on my hands this week. So I already have the water boiling, so last thing you need to do is watch me boil water. So I am going to throw my pasta in there. So what we're going to do is first cook the pasta. So you'll want to cook it to the directions that are on the box. So this one says boil it for 8 minutes. So in the last 2 to 3 minutes, we're going to add in our broccoli, and it's going to cook the broccoli quickly. So then, we don't have to saute it or boil it or anything. We'll just add it to the noodles, and then we'll drain it. And then we'll make our cheese sauce. So I've already measured out half the box of pasta, so I'm just going to throw it in the pan. I'm going to set the timer for 6 minutes to remind myself to add the broccoli. And then we'll finish cutting up the broccoli. So let me shift you a little bit. So with this, you'll kind of you don't want to cut them too big so that they don't cook in time. So I have them like relatively small. I don't know how well you can see that because of the glare of my windows. So sort of like we talked about before, you can either, break the pieces off and cut them. And then I'm going to throw them in my measuring cup. This is already 2 cups of broccoli. Or you can just go straight in and cut the broccoli head. The pieces won't all be like the same shape, right? It's a different shaped vegetable, so it's hard to get like a very consistent cut. But as long as they're like a similar size, that's all that really matters. So we'll finish doing that. So this is the 10th episode, and the civic engagement person in me would be remiss if I didn't tell you that there are 10 weeks until the election. So the election is on November 3rd. Make sure to register to vote if you have not already. We have this cool tool now called TurboVote, which I think we've used in the past. So if you go to UM-Dearborn.turbovote.org, you can get election reminders, you can register to vote, you can request your absentee ballot if you would like. So lots of cool resources on that page. They're also still looking for people to become poll workers. I feel like I might have talked about this last time. Super cool way to get involved. Yeah, so we have our final cup of broccoli. So I had like a medium-sized head of broccoli, and that was about 3 cups. So if you are like at the store trying to decide how much to buy, you don't need like a huge head of broccoli. You could buy it and then use it for other things or freeze some of it. But you don't want a head that's too small. So that's all done. I'm going to push this out of my way. So we'll scoot you back over here. I'm going to stir my noodles. It's always good when you are cooking noodles to stir them every so often so they don't stick together. I feel like there's a lot of variation in people saying that you should add oil so they don't stick, you should add salt so they don't stick. Do y'all have any preferences? If you do, throw them in the comments. Half the time I don't add anything, so up to interpretation on what you want to do. So we're going to keep letting this cook. There are 3 more minutes on the timer before we add the broccoli. So what we're going to do next, don't mind me while I look at the recipe. We're going to melt the butter in a large skillet over medium heat. So I'm going to turn my burner on. Words aren't my friend today. They normally aren't, but today especially. Alright, so I'm going to add my 2 tablespoons of butter. So the recipe called for unsalted butter, but you could use salted butter, as you might expect. It has salt in it. So if you do that, I would just potentially omit the 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt that's in the recipe, because you can always add more salt, right? But it's hard to make a dish less salty. So you can't see very well. So the butter is melting. You don't have to do this, but if I'm in front of my stove, I'm just kind of moving the butter around so that some of the friction and the movement helps melt it a little bit. So, hot. So I want this to melt. And what we're going to do is we're going to add flour. So we're going to be creating a roux, and that's R-O-U-X. So a roux is in a lot of different dishes as like a thickener. So once we add the flour, it'll thicken. And I was looking yesterday, just sort of interesting. There are like 3 main kinds of roux, and it's just the variation is in how long you cook it. So we're going to make a lighter roux because we're not going to be cooking it for that long. So our butter is fully melted. So we are going to add the flour and stir it for 1 minute. Woo. Okay, I'm going to wait a quick second because my timer is about to go off for the broccoli. So I'm going to add the broccoli first. Just throw it right in with the noodles. So then I'm just going to set the timer for 2 more minutes. And then once that's done, I'll check the broccoli and I'll check the noodles to see if they're at the right tenderness. Alright, cool. You don't want your butter to cook for too long or else it'll brown. So I'm sure you might have had before like brown butter cookies or something, right, where you're letting the butter sort of caramelize. I don't think you want that flavor in here. So we're going to add the flour. And then I'm going to stir it so that it's combined. And we're going to cook it for a minute. So you can see it's just kind of clumping. Well, maybe you can't see. Just kind of clumped together. But that's fine. It'll be perfect. So I'm just still like moving it around in the pan so that it doesn't burn. So it kind of just looks like a dough right now, actually. So a roux is generally flour and fat. So sometimes you'll see it with butter, sometimes you'll see it with oil, bacon fat, lots of different things. All right. Cool, we're just gonna go on to the next step. Slowly whisk in milk and chicken broth. So I've got my milk. So you want to continue to whisk so nothing sticks to the bottom. So there's still some clumps in here, but as we whisk it, they'll break down, and as the liquid gets hot, it'll also help it break down. So I added my milk. I'm going to add my chicken broth. All right. So our pasta and broccoli might be done already. I'm just going to add the seasoning quick. So, because we want to continue to cook this until it starts to get bubbly. So you could easily do this in like 2 steps, so you're not doing 2 things at one time. I just got over ambitious, I suppose, because you want to continue to stir this pretty constantly. So you could definitely set this down. It's not a huge deal. I'm just going to stir this, and then I'm going to take one little pasta out. You can't see him, but and I'm going to take a piece of broccoli out. That glare is real. So got a little piece of broccoli. Ordinarily I would do this with a fork so I don't burn my hands, but I'm just going to grab it and see what the tenderness is like. So the noodles could use a couple more minutes. Ow, I put the inside of my lip. The broccoli is getting close, but I could also use another minute or 2, so I'm going to set the timer for 2 more minutes. And again, like we sort of talked about, cooking times can vary a lot based on what kind of pan you use, what kind of heat source you use. If you add the noodles to the water too early, the water might not be hot enough, so it might take longer. So don't feel like you're doing something wrong if it doesn't cook in the amount of time. The other day I was making a lemon curd, which isn't something that I normally do, but I was trying a new dessert for my grandma's birthday, and the lemon curd uses egg yolks, and it's supposed to like thicken, and it took a long time, and it was very bothersome, but I stuck it out, and eventually it turned out okay. So this is not bubbling yet, but it is getting thicker, and it smells good. So I saw some varying reviews, right? Like some people didn't think it had enough seasoning. So I definitely cook it first, and then you can always add things afterwards. I think that's nice too, especially if you're cooking for other people in your household or in general, because, you know, I don't like things overly salted, but my boyfriend does. Like, you know, he has a little bit of a different palate, so he generally adds some salt. So it's just nice because then you can add things, but you can't take things away. All right, cool. I'm gonna let this sit for just a quick second so that I can pull out my noodles and my broccoli. I think they'll be done, so I'm just gonna go ahead and turn it off. I can always turn it back on. Woo! This is starting to bubble a little bit, which is so exciting. So basically the next thing that we're gonna do, so once it's bubbling and thickened, which I'm gonna let it bubble a little bit more so it gets a little bit thicker, we're gonna turn it off and we are going to add the cheese and stir in the cheese until it's all melted. So if you don't normally buy shredded cheese, you can easily shred it yourself if you have a grater, or sometimes there are attachments on food processors that you can grate the cheese pretty easily. I'm gonna turn that off. Yeah, we're almost done. This is crazy. Those noodles are good. Broccoli's good. I'm impressed. So this is a good, quick, under 30 minutes, right, meal. So I'm just gonna sprinkle the cheese in here. Oop, that's the wrong one. Dropped a noodle on the ground. So I'm just gonna, you can see, well, you probably can't see super well. I'm also sorry, like the camera on my laptop isn't the best, so sorry about that one too. So I'm just gonna stir this until it's all melted. I think I'm the kind of person who like will adapt recipes to no extent, but I think you could use other cheeses. I think it would just change the profile, right? So you could experiment if you didn't have cheddar on hand. You could try it with mozzarella or something. I don't know. It might be good. Might not be. Let's see. This is beautiful. Sorry, if you watched any other ones, you know how big of a cheese person I am. So it's all melted, nice and cheesy. I'm gonna strain the noodles. So I'm gonna pop out for just a second. Always be careful when you're doing this, because steam burn is real. So make sure you just practice safety so you don't burn yourself. Alright, so that is done. You could also obviously use a strainer. My strainer is dirty, and I also have this cool lid that has like holes in it. And there's a little lip on my pan. So we're just going to combine this. I'm real excited, y'all. I haven't really eaten much today either, so even more exciting. So in their instructions, it says if sauce becomes too thick, add milk as needed. So fun tip there. If you were adding the chicken, which again I did not do, you would add it now. So like the recipe calls for already cooked chicken. So I think in the little like intro before, this person had said that a lot of the times they will make like a big batch, like throw a bunch of chicken in their slow cooker. So then they have like shredded chicken that they can use throughout the week, which is a great idea. I'm so excited, y'all. So this was pretty easy, right? And I mean, a lot of the things hopefully you have on hand, right? Like milk, flour, salt, pepper, garlic, broth. So again, for broth, I normally use like bouillon just because I don't like to have a ton of cans of broth just because I feel like it can take up a lot of space. So you can get, probably can't see, and it's almost gone. So this is like loose bouillon, but they also have bouillon cubes. We do have at least beef broth at the pantry. We've got noodles at the pantry. I think there's a little bit of flour right now too, which is a rarity. We don't always have fresh milk, but we often have shelf-stable milk, which you could easily use. And you might be able to, if you are gluten-free, you could probably swap out, I mean, you definitely could swap out the noodles. You might need to play around with the flour. I'm not sure if like a gluten-free mix, if you can do that similarly, you might be able to use like cornstarch or something as like the thickener. If you're dairy-free, you could try to use a dairy alternative milk, right? Soy milk, coconut milk, almond milk. It might change the flavor a little bit. And I know sometimes, as somebody who has used this, because many of my family members are either vegan or have dairy allergies, like the diet cheese or the cheese alternative, sometimes they're a little bit trickier to melt, but if you found one that works for you, cool. You can sub it out pretty easy. Yeah, I think this would also work well with frozen veggies. So if you had frozen broccoli instead, I know sometimes I'll like buy a few bags of frozen vegetables just to have on hand. I would just add it to the water a little bit sooner so that you can make sure it fully cooks through. You could also, if you like wanted to make sure it's going to cook in time, you could boil it separately and then add it in later. I feel like, I don't know, this also could be good with like ground beef or something. So pretty adaptable. It looks so good. Let me see if it'll like, if you can really see it on my camera. I'm so excited. That's all I had for you today. Thank you so much for joining. Again, if you're watching this live, there should be a chat on the side that I'm responding to if you have any questions. If you're watching this after the fact, you can feel free to comment below. We do get pings when people comment, so I'm happy to respond to things as necessary. And if you have any suggestions on things that I can make, please send them my way. I'm always looking for new recipes, and I always love things that are like simple and I have most of the ingredients on hand. Again, thanks so much for joining, and we will see you in a couple weeks.